Hello everyone, this is a video about onboarding of various sorts, and we're going to start by talking about onboarding of software. And given the dire state of digitisation in the construction industry, this is something we're going to have to face quite a lot in the future. But let's start with a personal story. My dad has regular calcium infusions at the local hospital, and the last time I took him, unlike usually, it was a really bad experience, and it's only later that we found out why. Turns out the trust is adopting a new software system to manage patients, and when they did the beta testing for this, they didn't give the staff enough time to stop working in order to spend time beta testing the system, and therefore it wasn't properly tested. And then when they did implement it, they'd already reallocated 150 staff because the computer was going to do their work. But the computer wasn't doing their work right yet because it hadn't been properly beta tested. And as a result, my father ended up hugging the nurse who was crying because she couldn't do her job. This reminded me of a situation many years ago when I was running an architectural practice, and I had spent months trying to persuade them that it was worth starting to use a software as a service timesheet management system rather than the spreadsheets we were used to. And I tried for months and months, and eventually I resigned, which was a bit of a surprise apparently, but I had 4 weeks notice, and they decided that I should implement the new software system in those 4 weeks before I left, which obviously didn't really go very well, and was a very stressful experience for everyone with such a terrible deadline. Now, we heard recently nationally about one of the problems with onboarding software when it isn't working properly and you haven't properly beta tested it, with the post office scandal, which is a sort of worst case scenario where hundreds of people have been prosecuted and had their lives destroyed because of a piece of software which was assumed to never be the culprit. And apparently that situation is still going on. So what has this got to do with construction? Well, a corollary for this in construction is the handover of a completed project. When I was a little girl, my dad was a head teacher of a school which was going to be newly built, and I remember it because he came home once with a load of 1 to 50 drawings and plans and a suitcase full of little 1 to 50 furniture, which he arranged out on the drawing, which was very exciting for me. But when he actually took over the building, it hadn't been snagged properly, and there were all sorts of problems. One of the worst was that the drainage system had been badly connected. You can imagine how well that went, and also they had a walk-in freezer and fridge that had been connected wrongly and was desperately trying to cool down the entire school. So this isn't a problem that we've only just had recently, because that was in the 1970s. And then about 10 years ago, I remember reading David Frise's articles in Building. You might remember this, but he used to be chief executive of the Finishes and Interiors Sector Trade Association. And he bought a new flat, and he spent months chronicling all the terrible problems with the flat which hadn't been properly resolved. And when you think about it, the situation we currently have with all the leaseholders who are in properties that they cannot sell because they're being condemned, and that hasn't been properly resolved, and meantime they're having to foot the bill for all sorts of mitigation measures. We know that handover is a major problem in construction, and if we're going to fix it, we have to sort out the digitisation of construction as well, because one of the biggest things that we're handing over is all the information about the building, and that has to be in a structured digital form so that it can be used by the people who are going to operate the building. This reminds me of a conversation I had recently with Neil Yeomans when he was on the panel with me in Digital Construction Week earlier this year about soft landings and how important they're going to be in the future of construction's effectiveness. And if you haven't heard about soft landings, you should really look them up, because really it's about ensuring operational performance of the buildings that you're designing and constructing. And if we're going to do that, we need to think about the human factors as well as the information factors. And soft landings is really what it says on the tin, a gentle process of onboarding people into their new building or new extension. Given that we have something like soft landings, why is it not adopted so often? Well, I've been thinking about this, and I did make a video about 10 years ago about collaborative working, another thing that we haven't adopted enough in the construction industry, and it was about the 7 key aspects of collaborative working that Constructing Excellence came up with in the last century, that were all about 7 different things which were essential for collaborative working, and one of them was measurement. We have to measure what matters, because if we don't, we never learn from our mistakes. And there is a reason why, like with all the other 6 elements, we don't measure. We don't measure because we don't want to admit what we've done wrong. We don't want to take responsibility for our mistakes. Until we fix our attitude to mistakes, we're going to be in a very difficult hole. And this is going to be particularly important in the coming years, because gradually clients are realizing that they require better performance in terms of handover from their design and construction teams, and so are their insurers, which is putting pressure on them with information handover and general handover anyway. And not just that, but the European Commission is going to require much more effective handover and measurement, because they are pushing for better sustainability measures. And for example, life cycle assessments aren't just going to be one of those good, nice to have ideas that allow you to get a job, but the measurements are then going to be transferred and become dynamic in the life of the building as we measure more in the building. And the ultimate result of this is we're going to know whether our buildings are performing as predicted, and our predictions are going to be held to account. So with this all happening, what does this mean for the construction industry? Well, it means that we need to take responsibility for the handover, for the onboarding of the users of our building, and for the effective transfer of information about them so that it can be used to run a building properly. And thinking back to all the examples that I've given in relation to software and buildings, we have to ask ourselves, what sort of human and monetary cost are we willing to pay before we take this on as a challenge that we can rise to? So that's all for today. I hope you found it interesting. I'd really like to hear your comments. Maybe you've got some ideas about soft landings and why it hasn't been adopted. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.